Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our fourth town hall for faculty and staff. I want to thank all of you for everything you've done to get us to the halfway point in this semester. There has been a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty along the way from all of our planning. We didn't know if we would be able to get to this point nearly as safely and effectively as we have, and I'm very, very much appreciative. I'll say more about that as we go through the town hall. Your patience and your understanding, your flexibility is so much appreciated as we continue to pivot, figure out details, really write the playbook as we go. We're working on a lot of decision, a lot of implementation points, and we know that you have questions. We know that there's always uncertainty, and we want to continue to do everything we can to answer questions, to address any concerns that you have, and relieve stress and help us all get through this together. In that context, one of the things that I want to share with you, as you can see here, is a brief picture of our EAP. That's our Employee Assistance Program, and that's managed by FEI. FEI stands for our folks that are working in terms of family engagement and international types of assistance types of programs. There's a number of things that they can help you with. I know that our faculty and staff have dealt with challenges on the home front and the work front, in lives in general, in so many different ways. Our families are all affected, and we're going through the most stressful and most uncertain times. So I want to make sure that we start out with just a foundation in resources and support. I've talked with our Associate Vice Chancellor for Finance Administration and Human Resources, Tim Danielson, and he's said that survey data and the reports from folks who've worked with FEI has been very strong, very supportive, and I encourage you to reach out to them wherever and whenever needed. It's an important resource and something you should feel comfortable relying upon. They're entirely confidential and provide support for a lot of different things. So that's one thing, and certainly our website has more information that you can access through HR, and then of course their website that's here. Today, our goal is to provide updates on where we are and to talk about change, and especially what the future holds for us. We have received a lot of questions already. All of those questions will be answered either in the comments that you'll hear today, but also in FAQs and follow-ups. We want to make sure we address all the questions that you might have. Myself and other leaders have been spending a lot of time with governance, bringing questions forward, always answering those as much as we can. That remains always an important mechanism and an important voice that we salute, engage, and embrace as we proceed. So today we have about an hour, and we'll have time for presentations from a number of different areas. I'm going to talk about some issues around change and set the stage for what our think tank 2030 is doing. We'll then hear from our Vice Chancellor, Robin Van Harpen, who's going to talk about an update on the budget, financial challenges. Then we'll hear from our Provost, Mark Harris and Kathy Dolan, in terms of some of the 2030 think tank work. So I messed that order up a little bit. And then we'll hear the latest diversity, equity, and inclusion updates from Vice Chancellor Prince, who's going to be sharing those updates. And then we'll talk about whatever questions you have and address those. As I mentioned, we've received a number of questions in advance. We'll work those in wherever it makes sense. Otherwise, we'll feed your questions in as we proceed. If you have live questions, use the chat function as you have before. Thanks again for joining us. So as I think about our future and want to just set the stage a little bit for, I think, an important part of this town hall is to preview what we've been going through, some of the forces that are acting on higher education, and really building to why it's so important for us to recognize what the future has in store for higher education overall. I do want to continue to thank so many of you who have been so helpful for getting us to be here today. And I'd like to first recognize on the testing front the types of work that we're doing. We tested 295 individuals yesterday on campus, students. We've got some employees who are in groups that are at greater risk, working with students in residence halls, dining experiences, and so forth. So this is the population that we're focusing on primarily. Residential students, we've expanded that to non-residential students and employees. So at the rate that we're going, we're keeping our positives quite low. It's remarkable. I maintain that this is across the state of Wisconsin, the safest place you can be is on our college campuses. We're doing a lot of the right things in terms of the behavior, Panthers protecting Panthers, a lot of the things that we've done in terms of our safety for both residential and classroom types of behaviors for our employees, students, and staff. So thank you for that. I want to shift now and talk a little bit about what we're facing, what COVID has brought in front of us. And Jay, if you can go to the next slide, these are headlines from the last few days. What you see from the New York Times on the right-hand side of this is from yesterday. Cuts hit the bone as pandemic saps colleges. Even tenured positions are not off limits. That's the New York Times front page story. It's very grim, very concerning. At the same time, higher education, the Chronicle, you can see the headline in the top left there, colleges slash budgets in the pandemic with nothing off limits. And of course, an earlier headline from the Chronicle is the higher education's nightmare scenario. This is the real environment in which we exist. This is not abstract, this is not academic. This is what is aggregate across the country, what's facing us right now. We're in a moment at a crossroads that we've never been before in any of our careers. I think that's very clear. And the types of issues that we're dealing with are so significant, we really have to recognize we're not going back. And as much as we might think that public health issues can be broken into discrete, how are we doing in the next few months, and then think about the spring and think about the fall. The issues that I'm going to talk about right now are more fundamental. They're long-term and they're chronic. Jay, next slide, please. As we look at some of the forces and some of the activities that are going on, there's no surprises here for you. These represent 9 of the leading types of areas, and you could argue with the taxonomy. You could say that, well, there's actually 6 main themes here if you consolidate. But take a look: civil and social unrest, political state support. We've been in a situation since Tommy Thompson was governor where we've seen virtually nothing but cuts to higher education in the state of Wisconsin. Achievement gap and completion rates are mirrors of each other. We have the greatest high school achievement gap in the country, and that continues into higher ed across the state. And of course, that remains a vaccine problem, which is why we started Moonshot. Completion rates, that's again vaccine for most urban campuses. We have been providing more support for our disadvantaged students. We need to provide more. College debt remains a major national issue. Societal values. I've talked to you many times before about Pew Research, where the majority of Americans think higher education is heading the wrong way. That's both Republicans and Democrats. These are factors that are significant. Employer needs are major, and that's one of the issues that continues to shape our future. While we recognize we still have to maintain the core values around humanities, social sciences, liberal arts that are so important. And then finally, the demographics. You can't escape the fact that we're running out of teenagers in general for higher education across the country. Next slide, please, Jay. So as we look at then what this leads to, the forces on higher education, take a look. This is brand new data, new as of about a week and a half ago from the American Council on Higher Education, or ACE. The top issues facing presidents and chancellors across the country as of this fall: mental health of students, long-term financial viability, mental health for faculty and staff, enrollment numbers for the spring, and how do you sustain online learning. No surprises, but this is something that we would not have seen at this level a year or 2 years ago. So this is our reality. Moving on to the bottom of that slide, what you can see, here's the story that's facing campuses across the country. What's foremost in president's mind? What are the actions that are being taken? Hiring freezes, freezes on employee comp, renegotiating contracts, as well as furloughs. Next slide, please, Jay. So what does this mean for us? We have to look at this, and this is where some of the actions that we're taking come into play. We have a bumpy ride now, and no matter what we can think of in terms of the COVID-19 situation, The trends that I've just described are long-term. Those are chronic. Academic enterprises are in for significant turbulence. This is going to be not a touchdown and we're through with this in May of 2021. We have to prepare ourselves even more for the challenges that have faced us and will continue to vex higher education as a sector. The student experience has to continue to be focused on. We have to continue the culture of safety and health and do everything that we can to address the students' needs, the great uncertainties, and the fears and worries that they have. And third, our business models broke. They were unsustainable before the pandemic, as you know, in terms of the types of budget cuts and what we've been facing, and things are exacerbated now. This fall is representing for us one of the more significant cuts. The good news is we do have sufficient balances and reserves that we're not in the traumatic type of situation that we see many other higher ed institutions facing, but that will not last, and we have to really be on offense as well as on defense, and that's very much what we want to talk about today. And finally, enrollments. We are doing a number of things to turn our enrollment situation around, but the challenges have been with us for some time, and that's an endemic issue for most higher ed institutions. As we saw nationally, Wall Street Journal reporting 2 weeks ago, freshman enrollment down across the country 16%. Some notable campuses such as George Washington University, freshman enrollment down 24%. We've seen institutions, private and public across the state, that have been reeling because of that. Our colleagues across town talk about it's a 4-year liability and are looking at next year with significant numbers down again. So these are the realities that are facing us. Next slide, please, Jay. So what are we doing? The actions, first and foremost, wrap around some of the things in Think Tank 2030 to really establish a key direction going forward. And I want to reiterate how critical it is for us to take seriously the types of changes that are needed. We will hear more from Kathy Dolan and Mark Harris about Think Tank, so I won't go into that, but I want to underscore the need for us to not think incrementally, not to think about things at a molecular level, but really to think more broadly about our entire future. There's a lot at stake. So Think Tank 2030 has a number of great recommendations that we'll speak about in a moment. We have to make the difficult restructuring decisions. If you were to build UWM today to meet the needs of the environment, we probably wouldn't look like how we look today. So what's the right answer? How do we consolidate? How do we drive effective curriculum? How do we make decisions that are better for the campus around efficiencies? The partnerships, those represent alternative revenue sources in ways that increasingly we have to rely upon. There's a number of other things. I won't go through all of these, but I do want to have you recognize there's a lot of things that we are doing and many more actions that are underway, many of which we'll talk about today. So as we proceed and go forward, as I am about to hand off to some of my other colleagues, I do want to reinforce something that's critically important as we talk about this. We're doing a lot of different things. We have much in front of us. I'm actually bullish about the future of UWM because we have such great people. We have such an important mission, and what we're doing to have the prominent educational role that we have in this community. I spoke to Rotary today and had a wonderful audience, incredibly engaged, and it's so neat to have the support in this community and to have them recognize that our 191,000 alumni mean a lot, that our 5,000 students that we graduate a year with an access mission, with more students with diverse backgrounds, being able to represent and go forward and contribute in so many meaningful ways. That's the core of what UWM is all about. We're going to continue in that way, but we're not going to look the same. We're not going to be the same. That's just not higher education as we look forward. We have many great partnerships with others in higher ed and K-12. We have many in healthcare, in manufacturing, in nonprofit, in the arts. You name the sector, we're there. So as I think about 2030, before I hand this off to Johannes and the folks that are going to talk more about some of these other areas, let me just mention, some of you have asked about 2030 and you know, where our group is at, how did it get put together. Let me just mention and remind you, we originally constructed Think Tank 2030 with governance leadership involvement from the get-go. This goes back to the original team that formed the initial recommendations. They did their work in November 2019 through May of 2020. They developed a number of recommendations, and we now have a new think tank implementation team. The group was invited to continue again, so we solicited input, of course, from a number of different groups that included our governance chairs were invited, diversity of members' backgrounds, we wanted experience, and we wanted to also have manageable group sizes. So what we were pursuing was the leaders of the areas that the recommendations came forward from. And namely, think about for a moment, these recommendations included 4 major areas. Number 1, revise the undergraduate academic experience. That's a campus-wide situation. Number 2, become a radically welcoming institution. That also is campus-wide. Number 3, continue research excellence. And number 4, realign school, college organization and programs. So these are campus-wide initiatives. These are the most critical things that are in front of us. And if we do those well, we have a much stronger, much more sustainable future for all of our students, faculty and staff, as well as community. So I want to reinforce that as we proceed, and you'll hear this more from Professors Dolan and Harris, as we proceed, what you're going to hear is many opportunities for input. We want to engage, and I want to assure you all, my style, the Provost, and all of our leadership team, you've never heard of us as heavy-handed or top-down. It's inclusive, it's engaged, and I want to assure you that we will continue to do that. So that's something that I wanted to stress as we talk about the importance of change. We can't have every single person involved in every decision. That's not ever going to get us where we need to go, but we're going to go there together. So with that as background, let me now pass this on. We're going to hand the baton over to Vice Chancellor Van Harpen. We'll talk about budget updates, and then we'll move into the think tank work. Robin, please.
Thank you, Chancellor Mone. So today I have 4 budget topics that I'm going to try to cover very quickly in 10 minutes. We have received a number of budget-related questions, and I'm going to try to weave in answers to my remarks where I don't get to questions because we have limited time. We may have time at the end of today's presentation, and if we don't get to them, we will work on providing answers outside of this town hall forum. My 4 topics that I'm going to cover today are some budget updates for our current fiscal year, fiscal year 21, some updates on the planning process for our next fiscal year, 22, furloughs and layoffs, and our VSIP program. So to start off and talking about how we're doing in terms of our budget this year, fiscal year 21, as Chancellor Mone had said, we have been talking about the financial strain that we've been facing as an institution for some time pre-COVID. For about the last decade, we've been facing enrollment declines, largely related to demographic changes in Wisconsin. We've had an 8-year tuition freeze that we've been under, and we've also faced some of the largest state budget cuts in the history of the UW system. So when COVID has hit, that's really bringing a crisis on top of an already challenged situation. This summer, along with the scenario planning for health and safety, we also did scenario planning around budget. And over the summer, for the academic and administrative portion of our UWM budget, which is the largest portion of our budget, we had anticipated a total operating deficit, if we didn't take any action to reduce expenses, ranging between $25 million and $54 million, depending on how the situation would pan out. And that would be due to losses in tuition revenue, increases in expenses related to COVID, lost miscellaneous revenues, and state budget cuts on top of our pre-COVID operating deficit. As a result, we allocated out to the campus a total of $24 million in spending cuts across all schools, colleges, and divisions. And divisions are meeting a large portion of these targets through centrally imposed actions that we imposed in the spring, including furloughs, both position-specific and intermittent, hiring and compensation freezes, and the travel freeze. And then we said that we would continue to monitor what is a very fluid situation budgetarily. The first quarter of the year just closed at the end of September, and our Business and Financial Services unit is still preparing reporting around how we're doing in that first quarter. but initial information that they've relayed to me is that we're doing well. In terms of our losses, they are trending towards the lower range of the target that we were working with, still within that target, very significant losses, but at this point trending lower. However, we're only 1 quarter of the year in and there's a lot to unfold. We could still see more state cuts. We don't know exactly what will happen with the spring. So there's a lot yet to unfold, but so far, in terms of losses, we're trending towards the lower side of our range. And then in terms of expense management, we're also seeming to do well there. It looks like right now we're on target to meet that $24 million expense reduction, which is good. Which leads us to the planning for fiscal year 22, our next fiscal year. So every fall we go through a pretty intensive budget process to meet with every school, college, and division around their budgets and planning for the next fiscal year. And because of the unusual situation that we're in, we decided to change up the normal order for our budget planning process. We're still going through all of the steps that we normally would, but we are attacking it just a little bit differently. Because there was still a lot of information that's unfolding, we asked every school, college, and division to plan around a 9% cut. And this, we're not implementing an across-the-board cut, but just for planning purposes at the early stages, we asked every unit to plan as if they were to receive a 9% cut in FY22. And that's relative to the pre-COVID FY21 budgets. Units did that and they submitted information on what the impact of that 9% cut would be to their units. We're right in the process now of finishing up meetings with every school, college, and division on campus, talking to them in person about how the cut would impact their operations, as well as strategic factors impacting every school, college, and division. Following the budget meetings, a budget advisory group with representation from the APBC will then make recommendations on budget allocations. Ultimately, the allocations will not be across the board, but will be based on strategic factors as much as possible, as well as our best information at the time in terms of what we think the aggregate situation will be for UWM based on our revenues. We have received, in preparation for this town hall and in other forums, questions about the cuts and whether they're across the board or whether they would take into account what's different things that are happening in different units. And unequivocally, ultimately, the budget allocations for next year will not be made across the board. We haven't used across the board decision making in some time, and our new budget model that we're in the 3rd year of is based on strategic budget decision making. For schools and colleges, we are looking, have been talking with schools and colleges about factors such as enrollment growth, future market opportunities, costs of programs relative to tuition and accreditation needs. And those will all be factors that will come into play in the ultimate decision making. In addition, we have the 2030 work that's underway that you'll be hearing more about in a moment. Because that's happening simultaneously with the budget planning process for FY22, we've invited members of the leadership of Think Tank 2030 to participate in the budget building process. But in reality, we know that any decisions that are made through Think Tank 2030 will have more of an impact on the following fiscal year, FY23, than FY22. It's just going to be a little bit tight time-wise in order to have a dramatic impact there. But we'll start to take the things that we're learning from Think Tank 2030 in building the budgets for 22. And also, the more successful we are in managing the crisis right now in FY21, that will allow us a little bit more runway to implement thoughtful budgetary responses to the Think Tank 2030 recommendations. Next, moving on to furloughs and layoffs. As many of our campus community know, we have been using intermittent furloughs and position-specific furloughs as a temporary savings measure this year in FY21, and those are pursuant to an emergency UW system policy that doesn't exist in normal times. We haven't yet decided whether we will extend use of those furloughs into next fiscal year, FY22, and we're not going to make that decision until a bit further on in the budget process, again, to let more of the information unfold so that we know how far we need to go with budget cuts for next year. In terms of layoffs, we've always sought to minimize layoffs and use attrition wherever possible, and we will continue to do that into fiscal year 22. But the pressures associated with this crisis are more than we've ever had to face before, and there may be an increased need for layoffs in the future. We do not have that planned yet. In fiscal year 21, our current year, layoffs are very few, and really they're focused on targeted needs where the need for a position has changed. I did receive one specific furlough question about whether we could make mandatory furlough days more flexible. And the pragmatic fact is that furloughs, because they're mandatory and unpaid and not part of our normal systems, are very time intensive to administer relative to other types of leave. And so having a base set of mandated furlough leaves that applies to most employees really makes this doable administratively. And that's what creates the bulk of the savings. So the self-selected furlough days for the higher earners and exceptions and one-off situations really create a lot more work and room for error. And so the system that we have right now is the best that we could come up with in this short time period. Moving on to my last topic, which is the VSIP, or Voluntary Separation Incentive Program. On October 1st, Chancellor Mone announced the VSIP program, which is intended to help UWM strategically reduce or eliminate positions where otherwise it would be difficult or take more time than we have. In structuring the program this year, we cast a wider net in terms of people and positions that could potentially qualify for the VSIP. However, it is up to every division head to review the list of initially eligible individuals and their own budget situations and determine which positions, if vacated, would create significant long-term savings while still allowing UWM to best achieve our research and student access missions. And so this essentially is a position by position determination. Most units have now submitted those recommendations to Central HR, where they're being reviewed, and individual employees who ultimately are being invited to participate will be notified next week on or around November 3rd. And at that time, they'll also receive information about information sessions that will be held by Human Resources around the topic, along with other resources and context for questions about the VSIP. Employees who are asked to participate will then need to return their decisions if they do elect to participate by December 8th. One individual asked, can a dean or director choose not to participate and deny eligible employees from doing so? And the short answer to that is yes. Every dean or division head has to make that decision on who will participate based on budget and long-term planning needs. The VSIP is not intended to be an employee benefit to which employees are entitled, but rather it's an incentive to help UWM create savings that we otherwise might not be able to achieve in a way that has less impact on employees than layoffs might. So with that, I am going to close my remarks now and hand it over to Provost Britz, and I will participate in helping to answer questions at the end of this session. Johannes?
Thank you very much, Robin. And colleagues, good afternoon and welcome to our town hall. And Chancellor Mone, Mark, if I may, I also just want to say on behalf of the campus, we are blessed to have you as our leader, and we just wish you well and good health on a personal note. And so colleagues, I just want to say a few words about the 2030 work group, which started about as Mark said a couple of months ago, and I remember, Mark, I don't know if you recall when they called us to the Lubar Center of Entrepreneurship, and the whole 2030 team wanted to speak to us. And they said, we're not going to do these recommendations if you're not serious about them. And are you committed for a radical change on this campus? Based on the scenarios, based on the fact that the financial I think I was unmuted. I don't know how that happened. You know, and I just want to repeat how we were called in, you know, and asked by the 2030 implementation group if we are ready as senior leadership on campus for change, and how we gave our commitment to that change. And they told us it's going to be radical change as it relates to, you know, the number of schools, colleges, the number of GER courses that we have, making it a radical welcome campus. We need to change. There was urgency also from this group and seriousness in the way they took their assignment from us. And we made that commitment. And as you pointed out, Chancellor Mone, they gave us the recommendations, we accepted those, and now we are in the implementation recommendation phase. And we will look at our undergraduate curriculum. We will have to look at the number of schools and colleges we have. We will look at the research and our R1 status, as well as the overall culture of our campus and how can we be radically welcome campus. And so we have asked Kathy Dolan, the chair of the UC, and Mark Harris, seasoned administrator, faculty member on our campus, vice provost for research on campus, to lead this effort. And I'm going to ask Kathy first to say a few words, and then I think, Kathy, you can then just give it over to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Good afternoon, everyone. As you heard, I'm Kathy Dolan, chair of the University Committee. I'm one of the co-chairs of 2030. And Vice Provost Harris and I just want to take a few minutes today to talk a little bit about the process of the 2030 implementation team's work and some of the topics that these groups will be taking on over the next several months. So the process began relatively recently with the members of the 4 groups. Chancellor Mone laid out the sort of recommendations that serve as the details around which the 4 groups are organized. We began our meetings as 4 individual groups, and several of those groups have then broken down into various subgroups because particularly the groups that deal with the undergraduate experience have a lot on their plates. And so working as subgroups and putting the real key professionals sort of in charge of those first conversations seems to be working fairly well. So there are a number of work groups below the 4 groups that have been organized, and each of those subgroups or each of those working groups has a charge around a particular set of issues and is working to bring in relevant individuals from faculty, from academic staff, from university staff to offer their expertise around those particular issues. It is the case that the faculty co-leads of the 4 groups will be, and have already started, reporting to the Faculty Senate, reporting to the Academic Staff Senate, reporting to the University Staff Senate. Those visits will go on through the fall so that we can introduce the widest audience possible to the kinds of things that we're taking up. And we're going to try to talk to as many groups and meet with as many groups and individuals as we can, because as the Chancellor has said a couple of times, this is a whole campus project. And so there are a number of us who have been perhaps given the work to lay the outline, but this is work that will have to be taken up by every single one of us on campus. So we want to think about the process this fall as one of a conversation between the 4 groups and its members and the rest of the campus community. So in terms of the groups themselves, there is first a group that is dedicated to developing a distinctive student-centered undergraduate experience. As we move into a more competitive marketplace, it becomes very important for us to think about what sets UWM apart and how can we make an experience at UWM a distinctive and valuable one for our undergraduate students. The work on this committee is asking us to think about things like the first year experience and how we bring students into campus and how we orient them to university life. It is requiring us to think about the general education program and what a general education program looks like in the sort of contemporary era of higher education. We're also trying to think about ways to improve the student experience from the recruitment phase all the way through graduation and into employment. So at every touch point that we have, trying to figure out ways to make the undergraduate experience better. And this also is going to get us into thinking about course delivery modes, new technologies, and new pedagogical techniques. With regard to the second group, whose charge is to make UWM a radically welcoming and engaging environment for students, again, it's about asking ourselves what we're doing, why we're doing the things we do, and how are we interacting with our students in the classroom and in every place beyond. And so there, the group is focused on a series of conversations about institutional cultural change. How can we make the university more streamlined? How can we make processes more efficient? Talking about structural change, right? Where can we take down barriers to student success? It also encompasses our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives so that we can make our campus open to every student from every corner of Wisconsin and the country. And thinking about ways to create better connections with the community at large, with parents of children who are not yet of university age, to have UWM be a place in the community where people want to send their children. So those are some of the topics that will be touched on by those two groups. And I'll now turn things over to Vice Provost Harris to talk about the other two groups and to lay out a little bit of our timeline.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. This is Mark Harris, Vice Provost for Research. And I just want to say a few words about the other two work groups within the 2030 effort, and then a little bit about our timeline. The third group is one that is focusing on conducting top-tier research. The 2030 group outlined some areas for us to look at, expanding collaboration and interdisciplinary scholarship, infusing entrepreneurship, design thinking, and data science in our research and education, strengthen our partnerships with the community and industry and other institutions, and to optimize our faculty workforce development. Essentially, I think how we make best use of our faculty time. The group has been starting to discuss these things, and I'm thinking by the end of this week, we'll have a pretty good handle on people we need to really engage in terms of campus level folks who really understand some of these things. We've been working toward then laying out a timeline for ourselves to kind of systematically work through these and to also incorporate some of the past research work in terms of planning that we've been doing for many years that have been slowly moving in these same directions. Really hoping that we can accelerate some of the changes and think a little differently as we move forward. The last group is the group to realign administrative structures and program arrays. This is clearly one that interests a lot of people on campus. This morning, one of the co-chairs told me that they are beginning to work toward framing their conversations and developing a communications plan to get input from different schools and colleges and units that I think we'll start seeing rolled out in the next couple of weeks. They really realize how sensitive this is, but what they really want to do is to ask ourselves, if we were going to design the university, how could we maximize the educational and research opportunities? How would we really want to organize ourselves to implement some of the new avenues for research, as well as some of the evolving undergraduate programming that we've talked about in Kathy's section. So that's kind of the landmark, what we have in front of us. Mark's asked for a report by late January, so this will be an exciting 3 months, I think, as we begin to move through the activities of these various groups. And as Kathy had mentioned, groups are starting to report back. I know at the Faculty Senate, I was there a few weeks ago. So with that, Mark or Johannes?
Let me move in. I'll move in here. Johannes, did you want to wrap anything up or should I move on? Okay, so thank you, Robin, Mark, Kathy. Excellent job. Very important articulation of key points. At this point, I move on to Vice Chancellor Joan Prince, who's going to cover updates on DEI. And let me mention that everything we do going forward is enveloped and is really embraced by the frameworks that Joan is continuing to drive and lead with so many of your help, so many individuals who are helping work with this area. Joan Prince, please.
Hello, thank you, Chancellor. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, all of our strategic initiatives and our discussion today are grounded in our journey of diversity, equity, and inclusion, both in our division of GIE and in the institution overall. And we're focusing on education, training, and really embracing the defining characteristics of our differences. So let me take just a few minutes to bring you up to date on what we have been working on, as mentioned in 2 of the Chancellor's previous messages, and provide a glimpse into what spring semester will bring for us. Remember, we promised that we would hold the mirror up to ourselves in a number of ways, and we've begun that work. First, an update on the Towards an Anti-Racist Campus Social Impact Grants. When I say we received a wonderful response, we received a wonderful response. We put together a review team of faculty, staff, and students to review the grant proposals, and the final recommendations for 10 of them were made to Vice Provost for Research Mark Harris and to myself. The teams have all been notified and they're beginning their work. So many, many thanks to all that applied. Our plan is to provide an update for you via a web link and an opportunity to hear from the teams as their work progresses. And I'm happy to say that they crossed all schools and colleges, and yes, they crossed our non-East Side campus as well. So stay tuned for a listing of all of the projects, and we will find time so that you do hear those updates. Remember, these are short-term, impactful projects, and they must be completed within a calendar year, so by the end of 2021. So let the work begin and the outcomes develop. So next, let's talk about training, professional development, and our diversity history book. We will offer our required training protocol for all faculty and staff beginning in the spring. Not only will there be a basic module, so that we will all have that sort of even platform to start with, but there will also be several opportunities to engage in facilitated discussions. We will offer many supplementary options that you can engage in. There will be a schedule that offers various professional development video conferences that you will be able to review at your convenience, and these topics will be offered weekly and they will be archived. We're looking at many areas such as building dialogue and navigating difficult conversations in the classroom, understanding and addressing microaggressions, campus climate, understanding our own biases, and gaining skills to lead more inclusively. Topics around gender and higher education, and many, many more. And we also are going to ask you your opinion around needed topics as well. In addition to these opportunities, there will be facilitated book discussions and article dialogues that can be used at your team meetings. We will have trained facilitators for many of the sessions, and I encourage you to try and use these facilitated discussions as often as possible. There's quite a lot going on, so stay tuned for a schedule that will outline the timings for the offerings. An update now on our diversity history book initiative. We have engaged all of the authors and the co-authors for our 9-chapter volume, and it will focus on diversity at UWM, telling our stories. In commissioning this historical project, the Chancellor has asked that it be completed by next summer, at which time we will hold a campus celebration and launch of the book. Just to provide a little bit of intrigue, the chapter is focused on many dimensions of diversity, such as race, identity, women and gender, ability, and more. And the authors are current and retired faculty and staff. We are very excited to document the history of diverse groups in the structure and operation and development of UWM, so stay tuned for that. Moving forward, you will hear more about our Region of Choice initiative. Special thanks to Linda Woods, a lead HR business partner in finance and administration, who is representing UWM in that work, as we partner with over 100 companies on increasing diverse talent in the workplace. Spring semester will also bring information regarding our recruitment and selection task force as we look at our internal processes and procedures, also an initiative to enhance our visible diversity, and an update on the work of the Faculty Action Team, led by Dean Scott Gronert, Associate Dean of Nursing Jennifer Deering, and Associate Professor David Pate. We are very busy. And as I turn this back to Chancellor Mone, let me make an ask of you. Number one, when the required training crosses your email in spring, please, please, please be an advocate for its purpose and please complete it. It will be presented in an HR platform so that you will know when you are checked off for that requirement. Number two, engage either individually or as part of a facilitated dialogue around all of the offerings that you will be able to engage in. Reach out to us for help if you have questions or need assistance as to how to begin. And finally, number three, Dr. Vang, my Associate Vice Chancellor and Professor of History, Karen Mazzetti Moran, Associate Director of HR, and Jamie Semple-Weimer, Director of Equity and Diversity Services, will be reaching out to secure more facilitators for training. Keep an eye out for that call. You are needed to help us spread the work throughout the entire web of the institution. My thanks to all who have contributed to date and for those that have indicated their willingness to join in the programming. We are Panthers who roar. Let's work together to ensure that our workplace and our teaching, learning, and research environment is a space that raises all boats. Many thanks, and Chancellor, I will turn it back to you.
Wow. Nice job, Vice Chancellor Prince. Excellent update, and I'm really proud of everything that you've been accomplishing and working on with Chia and so many others. Joan, thank you for your update. At this point, we'll move into the Q&A portion. We've got a number of questions that have come in, and let's begin with the first question that I'll ask both Johannes and Scott Gronert to address. It comes from Tom LaBelle of the Helen Bader School. It appears that many undergraduate students are struggling this semester with a move to an online format for the vast majority of courses. Is there any discussion of allowing students to choose a pass-fail grading option for the courses this semester?
So, am I live already, Jay? Okay, I just can't see it. So, Mark, thank you very much. And I will ask Scott also to make a few comments. That is a question that just actually as of today or yesterday came up, then people start asking that. And I actually met with a student walk just actually today before this meeting to talk about the issue of failed pass grading and whether that can become an issue. And so it's fairly new in the sense of this semester, that I've heard about this. So we did follow up, and if needed, of course, we will look at the situation. So I'm going to ask Scott to say a few words. What do they do in the scenario planning? What would be the recommendation? As students do more midterm exams, that might be more pressure. So Scott, any comments from your end?
Sure, Johannes. So as part of the scenario planning work group, we did survey students. We had about 2,500 students respond, so about 10% of our students. And you're right, Tom, there's a lot of students had comments about workload, insecurity in terms of employment, finance, housing. And so it's clear our students, at least a number of them are struggling. And so we are, looking forward to the spring, going to be making some recommendations from the scenario planning work group on ways to help deal with the stress that and insecurity our students are feeling. And as the Johannes or the Provost just said, this is bubbling up right now, and conversations are just coming up about, maybe looking again at the credit, no credit options. Some other universities are also looking at that. So early discussions are beginning within the scenario planning work group and academic affairs.
Thanks, Johannes. Thanks, Scott. Our next question is for Johannes from David Pate of the Helen Bader School. Can you discuss or describe who's the typical UWM undergraduate student, please?
Thanks, Chancellor Mone, Mark. Dave, thank you for your question. I will just give you a brief outline of the typical student, how I understood, from a data perspective, Dave. The majority of our students undergraduate are full-time, about 83%. Majority of the students are residents for tuition purposes, also about 85%. Male, female, about 53% of our students, 54% of our students are female, so the majority are female. And then students of color, about 34% of the undergraduate student body. Student first generation is about 36% of the undergraduate student body. Majority of our students, 72%, are continuing students. So when we always talk about enrollment management, it shows you just how important retention is, not just the incoming new freshman class. And the majority of our students are degree seeking, about 94%. And the majority of our students actually do not live in our residence hall. It's about 82%. And currently our 6-year graduation rate, most of our students, either they transfer out or they graduate within the 6-year frame, is about 40, 44, 45%. And currently our first to second year retention rate of our students is about 74.8 to 75%, which increased a couple of years ago. It hovered between 68, 69%, but we did increase that. So that in a nutshell, Mark, is the kind of a scope of the makeup of our undergraduate student body.
Perfect. Thanks, Johannes. I think that's a helpful description and gives people a good sense of our student body. The next series of questions really are addressed to Vice Chancellor Robin Van Harpen, and they deal with a number of things that Robin kind of collect around working at home permanently and savings from doing that, the e-workflow issues, and then the UW systems ATP, and then of course protecting our most precarious employees. I know that they're not exactly related, but perhaps you could handle those as a group.
Yes, I would be happy to do that. First, a question that just came in was whether we could designate December as a non-furlough day month due to extra expenses around the holidays. And when we set the furlough calendar for the year back early in the spring, we consulted with all of the governance groups. There are some advantages to having this base set of mandated furlough days that are common across all employee groups. And we were really seeking days where there would be minimal impact on students and the campus community, and it was tough to get that base set of days. So unfortunately, we do have a day in December. It's between the holidays on December 28th, and that is set at this point in time, and it was difficult to find alternatives to the days that we did find that worked for the most numbers of people. The next question, how can we protect our most precarious employees from the disproportionate effects of furloughs and layoffs? I will say that every unit that's faced with budget cuts is looking at really hard choices, and I can testify to that, to my own division, Finance and Administrative Affairs. And the thing that is at the top of the priority list in determining where to make cuts in staffing is where it would create the least negative impact on students and our campus community. And when you apply that factor, sometimes that does result in a disproportionate impact in terms of how it impacts different employee categories. But some of the things that we are doing is, one, we always try to use attrition first and then strategically rehire, but use our natural attrition as a way of using voluntary departures from UWM first. The VSIP helps with that as well because it's a voluntary program. It helps us avoid some involuntary layoffs. We have a priority referral program so that individuals that do lose their jobs due to layoff or non-renewal have first access to applying to new jobs that might come open at UWM. This has been in place since 2015. We also have applied intermittent furloughs in a progressive manner so that the lowest paid employees do not have any intermittent furloughs. The highest paid employees have the most furloughs. Next question is relating to working from home, and a lot of employees have expressed that they really like working from home. It offers a lot of conveniences. Some have also asked about whether we can achieve monetary savings by having people work at home. That would help offset some of the budget cuts that we need to make. So these are all interesting questions that have generated a lot of conversation. It's too early to start to make permanent decisions about where employees will work in the future. There is positive impact to being in person and being a part of our on-campus campus community. So we're not quite ready to make those permanent decisions, and we still have to work our way through the COVID crisis before we get there. But we are learning a lot through this experience in terms of how to utilize technology and how well people can be productive from home. So we'll definitely be using that as we look to what the future state might be. In terms of saving money from that, that's a little bit more of a long-term proposition because we have classrooms and labs and all other manner of facilities dispersed throughout many, many different academic buildings. We really can't achieve significant savings until we consolidate and actually kind of divest ourselves of whole facilities or whole buildings. We are working on that. We're working on trying to sell the Alumni House. We're working on demolishing the Northwest Quad Building A and the old chemistry building. We have a space optimization initiative that's part of the Chancellor's Sustainable Futures strategic direction. So we'll continue to work in that direction. And the current COVID crisis and the way we've changed our work habits definitely helps us present or brings us new opportunities that we didn't have before. Finally, can we use more e-workflow, and why are some processes still manual? We're getting there. We have quickly moved a lot of processes that previously were manual into e-workflow to allow working from home. It takes time. Every process that converts over to e-workflow requires developmental time. And we have the same number of staff or reduced staff to accomplish that, but we're working through that. Some processes require processing manually. For example, I-9s is required by the federal government to be managed in person. And so there's some that will take longer to get there, and we're dependent on outside rules and regulations. Last question is about the UW System Administrative Transformation Program and what effect that will have on UWM staff. And it's just too early to tell on that. That's going to be phased. Madison will be going first. UWM will be part of latter phases. The reorganizational aspect of that is something that we've already been undertaking through shared services. So we've already accomplished a lot of what might happen at Madison that has yet to implement shared services. In terms of the systems that would be replaced, we're really looking to reduce shadow systems, but reducing staff is not a direct goal of the administrative transformation project. But more information on that to come, and that's a few years away from impacting us at this point. I will turn it back over to Mark to redirect to the next question.
Well, thanks, Robin. Let me get to this next question and share with you that I'm going to actually combine a few because they all fit together and they really deal with our planning for the rest of this semester, the spring, and really the decision matrix and how we're making decisions. And Johannes, you and Scott, I know, have been very collaborative working with the SPWG on this. So maybe if you can talk about how are we making decisions for the fall and spring, and what might be other factors that would be considered? I think we've been doing a pretty good job, and I know we'll have follow-up communication, but help reinforce where we're going and how we get there, please.
Thank you, Mark. And I, for some reason, cannot see my own screen, so I assume I'm on live. Thanks, Jay. So colleagues here on the, and I'm going to ask Scott to talk a little bit about the planning for the spring semester. But we have, developed and adopted a decision matrix for COVID-inspired changes in operations. Should we have to close down? When are we going to do that? And this matrix is actually available on the website. So people can just search coronavirus and look for the matrix, the decision matrix that we have. And we have identified 9 different matrix from, for example, positive student cases by campus, positive faculty staff cases by campus, classroom or labs with infection events. What about the community? What happens in Milwaukee? What happens in the county? So we have 9 of those different matrices developed. Then we have identified possible actions for each of them, as well as the data source for each of them. And then we use kind of a stoplight approach to say whether it's green or go up to red. When we know this is a very serious situation, we have to make a decision, might need to close down or flip back fully online. For most of these criteria, we're not just going to look at one absolute threshold, and that is important. You have to look at the context and associate factors. For example, where we are now, it's relatively safe and healthy in the dorms versus what's happening in the county and in the rest of our state. And then that will then play a role in how we make these decisions. So I'm now going to give it over to Scott. Scott, maybe to talk about the spring planning, spring break, which we will have, and also what we think will happen just after Thanksgiving. Scott, over to you.
Thanks, Johannes. And so the scenario planning work group looked at the spring carefully, looked at all the challenges of changing around the schedule, and looked at the benefits of changing, and came down that staying with the same spring schedule, same start date, same spring break was the direction we were going. And based on the monitoring of the COVID on campus, there's no change in what's going to happen after Thanksgiving. The plan is to continue forward with our face-to-face that's going on campus after Thanksgiving. So I'll turn it back to the Chancellor.
Scott, thanks. Johannes, thanks. Final question. We're going to sneak this one in. We're a little bit going to run over time, but just a last question that came in. I'm really glad we're able to get so many of these questions in. Johannes, this one's a kind of specific one. The 9-month furlough day of December 28th is in the grading period. Grades are due on January 4th. Is there a way to change the grading deadline, or else faculty need to grade on a furlough day? Thoughts on that, please?
Mark, thank you for asking me this question right at the end. So thank you for asking me this question. I will have to look into that, because this will be, I've not, dealt with that in the past, but I'm sure that is a possibility. So I will get back to campus on whether it makes sense, the question, if there's a possibility of a change. If possible, we should definitely consider that.
Sorry, Johannes, I didn't mean to lay that one in there. You didn't have a chance to see that, and it literally just arrived. So
yeah,
thank you.
No problem. That's part of the town hall. That's good.
First pass. Okay, great. So the next 30 minutes will be where I give you the large speech on a lot of different. Just kidding. We'll wrap up here, and very briefly, let me restate what's been said and where we're going, and really hit some of the key points here. What we wanted to do today is share with you, first and foremost, an update on just some of the decision factors, where we're at this semester, what's going on for next semester, really take a quick look at where the campus is, and acknowledge all the great work that you've done. That's to me so critical. We could not do this without the hundreds of people that have been planning throughout the spring and summer, and the thousands of you that have made such a difference to our 24,000, almost 25,000 students across all our campuses. So thank you for that engagement. Thank you for everything that you're continuing to do. And I know how tiring, how exhausting, how burdensome this is in light of everything else that's going on. But I'm so proud of the Panther spirit. I'm so proud of what you've done. And I have to tell you, in my experiences on campus, the students who are so appreciative and so grateful and frankly fearful that we're going to close and not be able to provide the education that they want and need, it's very, very gratifying. So thank you very much for all of that. So beyond the updates, we wanted to share really some key elements about our think tank future, and how in control, and how many people will be involved with so many important things for us. We could cover a lot more ground in terms of major initiatives that are underway, people who are committed, and it's really imperative that you know how many good things are in the works, and what's being managed to lead us to better places in the future. I won't go through everything that Kathy and Mark said, but I do want you to encourage others to engage and be mindful of the types of things that our implementation teams are working on. And then to reinforce what Joan Prince, our Vice Chancellor for Global Inclusion and Engagement, talked about. We're doing all of this on a foundation around how we take care of our people, with a mind toward enhancing diversity, thinking about equitable outcomes, and really including a lot of individuals, as is our way. I want to reinforce our guiding values and recognize that our mission at UWM is very much about being a best place to learn and work, and really to uphold the research and access mission that's so imperative for all of us. So those are things that we will continue to reinforce. And finally, again, thank you to all for everything that you're doing, and we'll see you in the next town hall, if not in future in some other capacity, given all the meetings that we're having in so many virtual ways. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your week. Bye-bye.